They found the diary in the wall behind a cracked plaster saint during a grey morning demolition at the old Greystone wards outside Holleridge, Maine. The workers pried loose the statue, and a small black book slid free with a dry sigh. Its pages smelled of iodine and coal smoke. On the first leaf, a name and a year were pressed into the paper with careful force. Nurse Merrin, 1904. The ink had bled at the edges, as if the paper had kept breathing long after the ward went dark. What follows was not a legend, but a record. It told of a temporary fever ward raised in an abandoned convent. It told of room 5, into which no patient entered twice. And it told of a phrase that returned in darker ink each night, the lines grooved as if written through clenched teeth. She wrote, "They all hear it. I am starting to hear it too. Everything you are about to hear was written as it happened and then hidden where no one would think to look." At the turn of the 20th century, Boston was a city heaving with steam, soot, and immigrants. Tenements pressed up against one another, alleys ran thick with ash water, and the harbour carried the stench of waste into the air. By the winter of 1904, another presence crept through the narrow streets, typhoid fever. It struck in waves, the early symptoms dismissed as chills from the draft, until fever rose, bowels gave out, and the afflicted were carried away in wagons. The hospitals, already burdened with consumption and industrial accidents, strained and then broke under the surge. A temporary solution was proposed. Use the empty convent on Holleridge Hill, a stone structure abandoned since the last of its nuns departed decades earlier. Its high arches and echoing halls had once sung with hymns, but now, stripped of its pews, it became a ward of coughing and moaning. Physicians and city nurses staffed it reluctantly. The city did not pay well, and the building was said to be drafty, full of hidden rot. Volunteers came and went. Few stayed. One did, Nurse Merrin, 27 years old. She was unmarried. Her family lost to influenza 5 years before. Records show she had trained at Massachusetts General, but her career was ordinary until she was transferred to Holleridge. Letters from colleagues suggest she was dutiful, quiet, often scribbling notes in a small ledger she carried everywhere. That ledger, now blackened with ink and brittle with age, became the only surviving witness to what took place. The convent was divided into wards, numbered in chalk on the heavy oak doors. Ward 1 admitted mild cases, Ward 2 and 3 the advanced. Ward 4 was set aside for children. Ward 5, at the far end of the east wing, was reserved for those who worsened suddenly. The staff complained of the trek down its corridor, where candlelight guttered and plaster peeled in strips. The iron bed frames in room 5 rusted quickly, though they were no different from those elsewhere. Patients transferred there did not recover. They did not linger either. Within a single night, they were gone. At first, this was blamed on severity. Those sent there were already past saving. But the speed of decline troubled even hardened doctors. A man who could still drink broth at dusk was a corpse before morning. Their faces, one orderly recalled, looked as though they had listened too hard to something no one else could hear. Merrin noted these patterns. Her diary shows she was meticulous, listing temperatures, pulses, and dates. Yet the clinical details gave way to fragments, darker thoughts written in ink that thickened as days passed. She wrote of the silence in Ward 5, how even the wind seemed to still itself in its walls. She wrote that patients spoke of hearing voices in the plaster. She admitted at last that she too strained to catch the sound. By February, staff turnover was high. Only Merrin and 2 orderlies remained permanent. Doctors rotated in, but few stayed past a week. There were whispers of shadows in the east wing. A nun's habit glimpsed in an empty corridor. Bibles misplaced, then found open at the same page. The city threatened to close the ward, but the epidemic forced it to remain open. The east wing grew crowded with coffins. Merrin herself did not leave. Colleagues wondered why. Perhaps she had nowhere else to go. Perhaps she felt bound to those she tended. Or perhaps the diary reveals the truth. She had begun to listen. The first weeks of Merrin's record read like any nurse's notes. She listed dates, temperatures, symptoms. The entries from early January speak of fevers that spiked too quickly, of patients slipping into delirium. But then the tone shifted. Transferred to 5, she wrote on January 9, boy, 14, still speaking when moved, silent by dawn. The words are precise, but the ink trails longer, as if her hand pressed harder on the pen. Another line follows. They all hear it. I am starting to hear it too. What was it? The phrase recurred. Sometimes it appeared in the margins beside clinical notes. Other times it was written alone, as if she could not leave the page without marking it again. The repetition grew heavier, the strokes darker. By mid-January it filled whole pages. The other staff began to whisper. A porter named Halloway, interviewed years later before his death, recalled that patients transferred to room 5 spoke of a low hum in the walls. Like bees, but inside the plaster, he told a reporter in 1937. You'd lean close and you'd think maybe it was just your blood in your ears, but they swore it had words. Merrin's diary confirms this. She wrote of a woman clutching her ears, begging to be moved back to Ward 2. She described another, a factory worker, who tore the sheets and stuffed them into his mouth to block the sound. Neither survived the night. Doctors dismissed it as fevered hallucination, yet even they faltered. One physician, Dr. Alcott, signed out of duty after 2 nights. His resignation letter mentions the peculiar stillness of 5 and his belief that patients were succumbing faster than expected. The letter ended with the words, I heard nothing, yet I left with my ears ringing. By late January, Merrin no longer confined her notes to patients. She wrote about herself. Woke at 2, could not sleep. Sound of low voice in corridor, no footsteps. Went to look, nothing. And, again, felt hand on shoulder while preparing tincture. No one behind me. The handwriting grows uneven, letters slanting. Scholars who later studied the diary suggested the ink itself seemed different, thicker, darker, as if she had switched to another well. Forensic tests in the 1,980 seconds could not confirm whether it was common ink or a compound altered by age. The deaths continued. Between January and February of 1904, room 5 saw 38 admissions. All 38 perished within 24 hours. Merrin recorded each. Man, 36, complains of hearing psalms. Dead by 3. A.M. Girl, 12, laughed for hours. Said, they are coming in the walls. Dead before midnight. Mother of 4, pleaded for her children not to hear. Dead by dawn. On one page a line appears beneath the last entry. Am I listening now, or is it listening to me? The convent itself seemed to alter. Orderlies refused to carry bodies down the east wing. One claimed the corridor lengthened at night, the door to 5 receding no matter how fast he walked. Another swore the door was locked when he returned with a priest, only to find it ajar again. City inspectors came in February. Their report notes poor ventilation and risk of structural collapse. Yet nothing was done. The epidemic forced the ward to remain open. The east wing's coffins piled higher. February 17 marks a turning point in the diary. Merrin's entry. Patient shrieked, said she heard them singing under the floorboards. Brought her broth. Could not hear, then perhaps did. A hum, faint. When I closed my eyes, it seemed closer. When I opened, it was gone. The page ends with black strokes, heavy, almost tearing the paper. The following day, her notes grew erratic. Lines repeated, words blurred, ink blotched. She wrote, if I stop writing, they will come. One detail stands out. She began to sketch, crude shapes drawn in margins, circles like mouths, lines radiating like wires, a series of marks resembling open ears. Later analysts debated whether these were hallucinations or coded attempts to capture what she heard. A sketch from February 22 shows a figure standing in the doorway of Ward 5. The figure has no face. By March, the staff had dwindled. Only Merrin and 2 orderlies remained. The city threatened closure, but fear of epidemic spread held the decision back. Merrin's diary entries from March grow sparse. Days pass without dates. When she returns to write, her hand trembles across the page. One chilling line repeats. They stand behind the plaster. One night, she described watching a patient bolt upright, eyes wide, shrieking at the ceiling. He begged me to quiet them. I could not. I heard nothing. Then, a faint rhythm, like a hymn, sung through stone. He convulsed. He died at 4:15. Beneath that entry, her own words in darker ink, I have begun to hum when I am alone. The last week of March, the orderlies resigned. Merrin remained. She wrote of candles burning themselves out too quickly, of rosaries breaking without cause. The diary pages are spotted with what appears to be wax, and others with stains no one could identify. Her final dated entry is March 29. Patient transferred, still breathing. I waited with her. She said she heard the hymn. She asked if I heard it too. I nodded. She died. I am not sure if she was first to ask or if I was first to agree. The rest of the diary continues, but without dates. Words trail into dark, heavy strokes, written as if in haste or fear. A line repeats across several pages. They all hear it. I am starting to hear it too. By April, the city finally shuttered the Holleridge ward. Records show the East Wing was sealed. Merrin herself does not appear in staff rolls after that month. No death certificate, no transfer papers. She vanished from the official record, and her diary, sealed behind a plaster saint, waited 77 years before anyone touched it again. The demolition crew in 1981 believed they had uncovered only an old ledger, a curiosity among rubble. But those who handled it recall an unsettling heaviness in the blackened book, as though its weight exceeded its size. Archivists at the County Historical Society dried its pages, cleaned the edges, and began transcription. It was in those last sections, written without dates, that the most harrowing entries emerged, entries Merrin had never meant for official eyes. One begins abruptly. There is no silence anymore. Even in prayer, even when my mouth is closed, they murmur behind the walls. The handwriting had changed, angled, slanted, words crowding each other. It is the writing of someone rushing to keep pace with thought, or fleeing something by forcing ink to page. Another page. I wake to find my lips moving, shaping words I do not know. My hands tremble when I try to still them. I sang last night. I do not know the hymn. The archivists noted entire leaves smeared black, as if her pen had ruptured. Forensic review decades later found no excess of iron or carbon to explain the thickness of the strokes. It was ink, but altered, as if drawn up from a deeper well. And then came the sketches. Not crude circles anymore, but lines, precise, interlocking, forming strange geometries. Some resembled ears, others spiraled like shells. One looked unmistakably like the floor plan of the East Wing, but with a chamber beneath that never existed on any map. Merrin wrote beneath it, "They are below us. They sing upward. Ward 5 is only a door." The final continuous passage is perhaps the most chilling. Another patient tonight. I did not move her. They did. Her body rose, as if lifted by many hands. Her eyes were open, but not hers. She sang, and I sang with her. We both knew the words, though I had never heard them. The orderlies are gone. I remain. I have listened too long. I place this book behind the saint, for the saint has no ears. The sentence ends with a jagged blot. What happened next is lost to time. Nurse Merrin never appeared in census rolls or grave registries. No obituary exists. She vanished as if she had been swallowed whole by the East Wing she refused to abandon. The building itself, left sealed after 1904, was said to carry a stillness that unnerved even trespassing children. A few dared knock on the door of Ward 5 in the 1940 seconds and swore they heard faint humming. Priests blessed the site in 1951, but even they admitted unease. The city declared the structure unsafe, and by 1981 it was demolished. The Black Diary, however, endured. Its pages carried not only words but impressions. Indentations where she pressed so hard the next leaf bore ghost writing. Fingerprints in dried ink that did not match hers alone. Some darker stains have resisted identification even with modern tests. For a moment, historians attempted rational explanations. Typhoid patients often suffered delirium. Fever could produce auditory hallucinations. Merrin herself may have succumbed to exhaustion and infection, her notes reflecting descent into illness. The hymns may have been wind through cracked masonry, the geometry of the convent amplifying sound. Yet the diary resists dismissal. Too many repetitions, too many corroborating testimonies. The porter who heard the hum, the doctor who resigned with ears ringing, the inspectors who noted silence so absolute it felt unnatural. And those sketches, one showing a chamber that no blueprint records, another scrawled with words in a language no archivist has yet placed. Experts argued it might be corrupted Latin or fragments of hymnals. But the phrasing does not match known texts. Some suggested Merrin had invented it, but if so, why did patients speak of the same song before their deaths? Perhaps the most damning artifact came not from the diary itself, but from a coffin found in the East Wing during demolition. Inside lay the remains of a woman in a nurse's habit, unmarked. Beside her, a rosary rusted black. Though no record confirmed it, many whispered it was Merrin herself, interred without ceremony. The rosary beads had fused together, as if melted by heat, though no fire had touched that wing. When the coffin was examined, the skull bore a peculiar mark on the inner surface, thin grooves along the temporal bone, spiraling inward. Forensic pathologists could not agree whether it was the work of decay or deliberate incision. One noted in his margin, "It resembles an ear turned inward." The climax of Merrin's tale is not merely the revelation of her words, but the suggestion that she became part of what she described. The diary ends where her body begins, and neither offers closure. Instead, they echo each other, the writing of voices in the walls and the bones shaped as if to hear them forever. And so Room 5 remains legend, not because anyone entered twice, but because one woman stayed and listened until she could not leave. When the diary was first catalogued in 1981, the county archivists assumed it was merely a historical curiosity, a window into the struggles of public health during the typhoid crisis. The initial transcription team tried to frame Merrin's words as the product of exhaustion and grief, her hearing it too, nothing more than the testimony of a young woman overwhelmed by death. For a brief moment, that explanation satisfied officials, but not for long. The more people read the diary, the more the same peculiar details unsettled them. The repeated emphasis on sound, the obsessive sketches, the way her entries blurred into fragments. Some scholars suggested it might represent an early case of psychosis under duress. Yet others pointed out the uncanny consistency. Why did patients describe the same hymn, the same murmuring, long before Merrin herself admitted to hearing it?
In 1983, a medical historian published a paper arguing that Merrin's case revealed the psychological toll of epidemics.
He drew parallels with accounts from the influenza of 1918, where nurses reported spectral choirs and phantom voices in morgues. When death is constant, he wrote, the living will lend it a voice. His conclusion was rational, clinical, and yet readers of the diary itself often came away with a different impression. One archivist confided in her notes that she began to hum while working, only to realize she was repeating a tune she did not know. Another claimed the diary carried an odor that waxed and waned, not just mildew, but something like iron and candle soot, growing stronger at night. The diary was eventually locked in a climate-controlled case, less for preservation than for unease. It is rarely displayed, and when it is, visitors linger only briefly before moving on. The handwriting, dense and slanted, has a way of catching the eye and holding it too long. The convent itself no longer stands. Where the East Wing once loomed, there is now a paved lot and a grocery store. Yet locals sometimes insist the ground hums faintly when machinery digs too deep. Work crews occasionally report their tools rattling, as if against an unseen vibration. No tests have confirmed this, and few pursue it. Most prefer to leave the lot undisturbed. Room 5, of course, is gone, but the memory of its silence persists in the city's folklore. Old nurses tell it as a warning to students: do not listen too long to your patient's fevers. Ghost tours mention the ward in hushed tones, though they rarely linger on Merrin's name. It is as if acknowledging her too directly risks summoning her back. And then there is the matter of the coffin, the anonymous nurse with grooves carved into her skull. Officially, the remains were reburied in a municipal graveyard. Unofficially, whispers claim the rosary beads were kept by a priest who believed they held proof of unclean rites. Whether Merrin lies in consecrated ground or elsewhere remains uncertain. The diary makes no mention of her end. What lingers is not her death, but her listening. She was, after all, the only one who stayed. The doctors left, the orderlies fled, the city shuttered the east wing. But Merrin wrote until her ink nearly tore the pages. She heard something in the plaster, and she chose to record it rather than deny it. Perhaps the most unsettling thought is this: the diary itself has become a vessel. Each reader, bending close to the glass, repeats the cycle. They scan the words, murmur them under their breath, and for a brief moment, they too listen. And if they listen long enough, who is to say they will not hear what Merrin heard? The reflection is simple yet heavy. History leaves artifacts, but artifacts can carry echoes. The Black Diary is more than a relic of a forgotten epidemic. It is a reminder that silence can hold voices, and that some doors like Room 5 are best left closed, even after the walls that framed them are gone. Merrin's final act was not to save her patients, for none could be saved. Her act was to write. And in that writing she opened a channel between then and now, between the fevered breath of 1904 and the quiet hum of today. That is why the diary still matters. That is why the story endures. Because once you have heard of it, you may begin to hear it too. If this story unsettled you, stay with us. Subscribe for more forgotten histories, where relics still whisper and the past never truly falls silent.